Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for viewing this webinar today on permitting stream restoration projects underneath the Programmatic General Permit 10. I'm Janice Gardner, ecologist at Wild Utah Project. Our nonprofit organization provides science-based strategies for wildlife and land conservation. Our organization greatly values working with our partners like Trout Unlimited, and today we actually have Paul Burnett, Trout Unlimited Utah Water and Habitat Program Lead, as co-hosting this event. Trout Unlimited conserves, protects, and restores North America's cold water fisheries and their watersheds. So based on our overlapping missions, Paul and I have done several low-tech stream restoration projects, and we value our role in helping share relevant information to our colleagues who are also involved in stream restoration here in Utah and the Intermountain West. At Wild Utah Project, we really value the well-being of each of our partners like you, our volunteers and staff, and we're committed to creating a culture where everyone is welcome. We ask that you always treat each other's diverse experiences, identities, views, and beliefs with respect. If you have any questions about our culture of inclusion or have concerns to share regarding this webinar or our other events, please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally. You can also find ways to communicate on our website at wildutahproject.org. We'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Easter Shoshone, Gashute, and Ute people. This acknowledgement is a simple way of showing respect for the history and culture of Indigenous people that are still part of Utah's community. So the purpose of this webinar is to help support you completing a joint stream alteration permit application for your stream restoration projects. We are very fortunate to have Mrs. Nicole Fresard and Mrs. Samantha Jones of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers joining us. Utah Division of Water Rights Regulatory Specialist Chuck Williamson is also joining to answer your questions you may have. This talk's going to begin with an introduction to the new PGP 10 permit application. Then we'll go through some comment and relevant questions that you may have that are relevant to stream restoration practitioners. We'll hold time for some Q&A at the end. Before I hand it over to Nicole and Samantha, this webinar is being recorded, and we ask that you stay muted. If you have questions, please use the chat box. When we get to the Q&A session at the end, I'll moderate those questions for Nicole, Samantha, Chuck, or Paul Burnett. So with that, thank you again for attending, and I'll hand it over to you, Nicole.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Nicole Fresard. I'm a senior project manager with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Utah Regulatory Office. Presenting with me this morning is Ms. Samantha Jones. She's also a project manager at the Utah Regulatory Office. And we are going to be talking about the General Permit number 10. We're going to be mentioning this permit a lot, so we're going to be referring to it as the PGP 10. I'm going to be turning off my camera during the presentation, and I'll turn the camera on at the end of the presentation for questions. Okay, so the PGP 10 is a type of permit that we use for activities with minimal environmental impacts, and these activities are authorized in conjunction with the State of Utah Stream Alteration Program, which is administered by the Utah Division of Water Rights. The idea of having this general permit is to eliminate the need of having to go to both the state and the Corps to obtain separate permits for very small, minimally impacting projects. This will streamline the permitting process for activities that have minor environmental impacts. And the PGP 10 is issued every 5 years, and we recently issued the permit again on February 22nd, 2021. And the permit will be valid until February 22nd, 2026. The permit applies to perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral streams for work that has minimal environmental impacts. The activities covered under this permit include things like culverts, bridges, utilities, bank stabilization, outfalls, road construction projects, and restoration projects, including beaver dam analog projects. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this presentation. So every time that this permit has to be reissued, we evaluate the cumulative impacts for the projects authorized in the last 5 years, and we make adjustments as necessary for the activities that are authorized under the permit. As mentioned before, this permit is for minimal, for projects that have minimal impacts, cumulative and individually. So we evaluate all the activities that we permitted in the last 5 years, and then we say, well, what needs to be changed? What needs to be modified? What needs to be included? And then we do all of those reviews, and then we reissue the permit, which is what just happened a couple of months ago. The permit has some limitations. And the reason why it has limitations is because it's for very, very small projects. One of the limitations is that it has to be a single and complete project. So for example, the PGB-10 limits the work to 300 linear feet of impacts to stream. So if a project is 600 linear feet of bank stabilization, for example, you cannot split it into two projects that are 300 linear feet to meet the conditions of the PGB-10. So that 600 linear foot project would have to be processed under something else, some other type of permit by the Corp. One of the changes in the recent reissuance of the PGB-10 was setting up limits for restoration projects, because before, in the previous permit that we had, we didn't have limitations on restoration activities. And that kind of became a little problem when it came to cultural resources. So in this permit, we decided that we needed to limit that. And then restoration projects are limited to 300 linear feet, like every other activity under the GB-10. So another limitation of the PGB-10 is that the authorization cannot be modified. So once we get something permitted, the scope of work cannot be modified. That's final. And then if anything changes, then we need to reassess the project and verify it again. But those are minor things. When it comes to permit conditions, there's 22 conditions in the general permit. And then we have a lot of people that don't read the permit. So people are, people should read the conditions, each one of them, because they're responsible to comply with each one of those permit conditions. In this presentation, we're kind of like trying to do a really quick overview of the general permit, because we want to focus on the Beaver Dam analog projects. So I'm talking really fast about, exclusions and limitations and things like that, but we'll spend a lot more time talking specifics about restoration projects. So one of the things that I wanted to mention that is very important for Beaver Dam analog projects is that in the exclusions in the general permit number 10, you cannot discharge fill material in special aquatic sites. And a special aquatic site would be a wetland. So when we're looking at a permit, when we're reviewing an application for a Beaver Dam analog project, if there's a discharge in a wetland area, that's something that would not be, that we wouldn't be able to authorize under a general permit number 10. So it's very important that that's mentioned in the application. Anything that is discharged in waters, that's something that we can review under the PGB-10, nothing in wetlands. So another thing that that is excluded in the general permit number 10 is relocation of streams. And that is kind of important because there's a lot of projects that are restoration projects that came up in the last revision of the permit. And, we were thinking about it, and we were, looking into the applications and everything, and we decided, hey, why don't we include restoration projects into, the relocation projects? We can include relocation projects into the PGB-10. So anything that's limited to 300 linear feet, we can permit under the PGB-10 now. So that is a very good change. It's a very positive change. Other exclusions that cannot be permitted under the general permit, the PGB 10, are activities on tribal lands, things that are considered emergency situations. We have other general permits for things like that. Anything that is after the fact. So for example, if you do the work and then you decide to come to the court to get a permit, that would not be something that you can get a general permit number 10 for that. Activities in core civil work projects. So that would be two areas in the state. One would be the Surplus Canal and the other one would be Case Creek. So those areas would be excluded from the PGB 10. And then anything that would have an effect on ESA or cultural, ESA is endangered species or cultural resources. And, you know, there's an exception to that. And then if there's a federal agency that went through the consultation process for the effects of those for endangered species or cultural resources, then we could evaluate the project under the PGB 10. So every time that we reissue the permit every 5 years, we have to talk to the state and evaluate the water quality impacts for this permit. And this time around, we went to the state, the Department of Environmental Quality, and they included a condition in the water quality certification that indicates that every time that a project occurs in a Category 1 or Category 2 water, there's got to be this additional coordination with the state. A lot of the Beaver Dam analog projects that I've reviewed are happening in Forest Service land. And a lot of these Category 1 and 2 waters are in Forest Service land. So there's this special consultation or coordination that needs to happen. And some of these projects are going to require you know, an individual water quality certification with the state, and that's going to be a separate process. And we'll definitely guide you through the process if that ends up happening, but a very few number of projects will need that type of review. But I think it's important to mention this because this is something new and we never had to do it before. But we're working with the state to make this you know, a very simple, quick, and fast process. When it comes to the notification procedure, not a lot of things have changed from the previous permit. We need pretty much the same things that we needed before. We need, you know, an application, which changed a little, and Samantha will be talking about that. But the additional materials that we need for review are pretty much the same. We need a location map, and this one, here I put some examples of information that was submitted for Beaver Dam analog projects. So we would need something that clearly shows the location of where the restoration project is happening. Usually we need to see where the ordinary high water mark is located at the site, because that's what determines jurisdiction for the Corp purposes. And then it would have to be a plan view and a cross-sectional view. We also need to get pictures of the site, because for small projects like the things that get authorized under General Permit number 10, we don't go to the site. So we need to see what's happening there, what kind of vegetation, what kind of stream, you know, what the site conditions are. So we need pictures, and we need to make sure that there's no snow covering the ground. We get a lot of pictures like that where, you know, we start looking at them and then we're like, well, we can't see what the vegetation is. So make sure that the information that you're providing, you know, makes sense. So if there's going to be any areas that are going to be disturbed during construction, make sure that you include a restoration plan. For bank stabilization projects, which is not so related to Beaver Dam analogs, but, you know, we would need information for bank stabilization measures if the project includes any of that. Now, I just got this information this morning into the presentation because I think it's important, especially for Beaver Dam analog projects, because when it comes to those types of projects, the actual impacts are very small, but the length of impacts the overall impacts are very long. Sometimes you're looking at 2,000 linear feet of impacts, but in reality, you're impacting 100. That's like the direct impacts, but the indirect impacts are, you know, 2,000 linear feet. So this slide shows a very good location map that shows all the points where the beaver dams analogs are going to be installed. Then we have a table that shows, the number of the beaver dam analog, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, with GPS coordinates. So we can, plug them on the map and see the exact location. Now, this one includes a picture as well for the specific site. So this is site 8, which is located at those specific coordinates. And then we know exactly what the vegetation is along the banks. And this is really important because, again, when we need to know whether, if there's wetlands in that area or not, which could disqualify a project from the general permit number 10 process, this is like perfect information for us to be able to determine, yes, this qualifies for GB10, or no, this is going to need a different type of review. So this could be used as, perfect example for what we would need for a review. Okay, so I think this is for Samantha to talk about. This is the new joint permit application. We did a lot of changes because the application that we had before did not have all the information that we needed. So I can give you control, Samantha, if you want, or I can.
That's okay. I can just tell you when to switch the slide.
That's fine.
That may be better. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Jones, and I'm also a project manager for the Corps of Engineers, and I oversee projects in the southern Utah counties. So I'll be giving you an overview of the new PGB10 application. So this is what the new application looks like, and as Nicole said, we've made some changes to it. As you can see, there's a section for applicant information, and we have now included a section for your email address. We also have a section for authorized agent information, and this will be where you include info about a consultant that you might be using or someone that's helping you with the permitting process. There's a section for the project location and stream information, and this is where you will put the latitude and longitude of the project location, the name of the stream being altered, the county, and an address if you have that. And then we have a section for project information, and this is where you will give a description of the project, the purpose and the need for the project. And it's important in this section that you really give a good amount of detail. So letting us know what the direct and indirect environmental impacts will be, including temporary impacts and including positive impacts. So because these are going to be restoration projects, we need to know how is this project going to improve the conditions at this location. And we will need to know what equipment you will be using for construction or placement of fill. And this is the section where you would state if impacts to wetlands are going to occur. And as Nicole stated earlier, impacts to wetlands are not authorized by this permit. So it's very important for us that you put that information right here in the application so that we can see it and be clear if it doesn't qualify. We also have a section for additional project information, such as what steps you took to minimize impacts, and that can include best management practices like silt fencing or erosion control methods. There's a section for any proposed mitigation to offset the impacts, a dewatering plan if you are working in a wetted channel, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Alternative ways that you could accomplish the project purpose. And there's also a place in the application for you to check whether cultural resources or listed species will be affected by the projects and whether or not surveys have been done to determine this. And we have a section for any other authorizations required for the project and whether there is federal funding for the project. And this will help us determine if another federal agency is the lead agency for the project. And lastly, we have the estimated start and completion date of the project that you'll put there at the bottom. Okay, next slide. Okay. So we wanted to call out this section specifically in the permit because it's important that we get the specific information about the fill being placed into waters of the U.S. And we've added a definition of fill material and a definition of what the ordinary high water mark is for clarification, because sometimes people are a bit confused as to what counts as fill material and what the ordinary high water mark is. So it's defined for you there. So this is where you will put the linear feet of stream being impacted below the ordinary high water mark, the acreage or square footage of stream being affected, and the source and type of fill material. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then we also wanted to call out this section because it's important for us to know what type of flow regime the stream has. So is it perennial, intermittent, or ephemeral? And if the stream is ephemeral or intermittent, then you could potentially do the work while the stream is completely dry and would not need a dewatering plan. However, if you indicate that the stream is perennial, meaning it flows year-round, we will need to have a dewatering plan that shows how you will be diverting flow so that no work is done in the live flowing channel. Work in a wetted channel is prohibited because of the increased sedimentation that can occur and the water quality impacts that would occur downstream of the project area. Okay, next slide. And here we have a map showing which project managers are the person of contact for each county in Nevada and Utah. So you can look to see what county your project is in and who would be the project manager processing your request. Next slide. Okay, and I think we're ready for questions.
Great, thank you, Nicole and Samantha. I have a couple questions to just kind of reframe some of the information that you provided. So far in this new form, what are some of the most common mistakes or places where people aren't filling out the form accurately? What are places where people really need to pay special attention to?
Samantha, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So we came up with a few things that we commonly see that is missing. Sorry, let me turn my camera back on. It's really important that we know how the project is increasing the functions and services of the aquatic resources. So it's really important that, especially for restoration projects, that is included in the description. How is this project going to improve the environment? It's also really important, some of the things that are missing sometimes is background or baseline information about the site. So it's important that we know, what was the site like before? Did you do a project somewhere else that was similar? And so you have evidence that this project will be successful. Another thing that I did kind of talk about earlier, but I'll just reiterate, is a lot of times the application is missing a dewatering plan. So the person will indicate on the application that the stream is perennial, but then they don't include a dewatering plan. So that's very important. And some of the things that Nicole discussed as far as the information that's required, but it's not necessarily in the application. So ground photos, that's commonly, we get the application, but we don't get let's say, a vicinity map, or the before photos, or we don't get the plan view or the cross section. That's missing. Let's see.
And for like a plan view or cross view, in my experience, you guys don't require for like a BDA project anything that's like, you don't need a professional engineer to stamp it, but the Utah State University's guidebook for low-tech process-based restoration has tons of plan views that I've used in my permit applications, and those seem to be sufficient. Is that still the case?
Yeah, and actually, in fact, we would, I personally would prefer it not to be an engineering plan, because that gives us a lot of information that we don't actually need, and it just kind of overcomplicates things. We would much rather just see a plan view and a cross section that's very simple, that just shows the aquatic resource and how you're going to be impacting it below the ordinary high water mark. So it can be very simple, and that's actually preferred. And yeah, the vicinity map, sometimes that's missing, and that's very important for us to have. And I think another common mistake is just lack of information. So as we were saying, it's important to include if wetland impacts are going to occur. It's important to have that in the application. Some people don't include all of the fill because they don't quite understand what counts as fill. So it's important to know that anything going below the ordinary high water mark counts as fill. So that all needs to be calculated when you're calculating your impacts to the stream.
Great. So I've got a great question for you is, so our low-tech projects like beaver dam analogs, are they exempted from the requirement to do a dewatering plan?
It's not that it's an exemption, but we would want to know how you're planning on doing the work when there's water. So we just need to know how it's happening. Because, we're sitting in an office, and you guys are in the field. You guys, you're the ones doing the work. We're just processing the paperwork side of things. So we want to know the history behind it. How is this going to happen when there's water? I don't know. Explain it to me. So you don't necessarily, I think a dewatering plan would be more adequate for, I don't know, if you're putting a culvert or something like that you need to do it in the dry. So you would put like a cofferdam or something, but sometimes, you can't really have a form that's specific for each type of work. So this one is kind of like a general form, and yeah, we have general requirements for everything, but you do need to target it to specific projects. So we're not going to send a request for additional information if you don't provide a very detailed dewatering plan to explain, well, this type of project does not need to be done in the dry because this, and that reason. And that is sufficient. Just we need an explanation. That's all we need.
Great, thank you. So if you wouldn't mind just touching again on how to calculate the linear feet of stream impacted for the permit application. I think a lot of folks get confused with that. So for example, if you want to put in 10 beaver dam analogs along 400 linear feet of stream, how would one calculate the impact for those 10 beaver dam analogs?
Let me just write it down. You said how many?
Let's say 10.
10 and 400 linear feet, right?
Yeah, so we'll just make some assumptions here. Let's just say that each beaver dam analog is about 4 feet long across the stream, and it's about 2 feet wide.
Okay. So the indirect impact would be 400 linear feet. So we would want to know what the total stream impact is going to be. So if it's 400 in this case, it's 400. But your direct impacts are going to be 440 linear feet because that's the area of fill material that you will be putting in the stream. So just remember, direct is one thing, and indirect effect is going to be the other thing. So even though this is a restoration project and the effects are beneficial, they're still considered effects. So they don't have to be bad. They don't have to be detrimental effects. They're beneficial effects. But we want to know what those effects are going to be. So if we're talking about like 2,000 linear feet of effects, that's fine. Just let us know what it's going to be. Now, if you're putting, I don't know, and I don't know how feasible this would be, but if you're putting, I don't know, 1,000 beaver dams and then analogs, and that's going to be more than 300 linear feet in total, then we're going to have to process that project under something else and not under the GP10, because that's going to exceed the limitations of the general permit number 10 for one single and complete project. But that would be for the direct impact, not the indirect impact.
So while this presentation is focused on the PGP-10, if your project doesn't quite fit in with this, what is the next best permanent application that a stream restoration practitioner could apply for if their project doesn't fit into these requirements?
Do you want me to take that, Samantha? I can take it.
Yeah, you can take that one.
That would be a nationwide 27. The nationwide 27 permit is specific for restoration projects. So if we didn't have a general permit number 10, and what general permits are regional permits. So if you go to Florida or Nevada or any other state, there's not going to be a general permit number 10. They're going to have, other general permits that are specific to those states for the needs of those states. Here, we have the stream alteration program, and then we decided, hey, why don't we come up with this permit that we can work with the state directly, and then, do this really quick thing, and then help people to get their permits quicker. So that is the intent of general permits. Then the next level permit are the nationwide permits, and they're called nationwide because they're applicable to the entire country. So you can get a nationwide here, you can get a nationwide in New York, anywhere in the country. So then that would be the next level. And the nationwide 27 is specific to restoration projects. And that one requires a different form, and it requires a couple of other, items that need to be submitted. But we can definitely guide people through the process because it is a little bit more complicated, and it takes a little bit more time. But yeah, we can definitely help out. And then if we see the need to do another outreach event to explain the process for the nationwide permit, we can do that as well.
Great, thank you. So if anyone in the audience has questions for the Army Corps, we also have Chuck Williamson, who is with the Utah Division of Water Rights. So he's on the state part of this joint permanent application. Please feel free to type those questions in the chat box, and then I'll moderate them. And also, if folks are interested in another outreach activity about the nationwide 27 permit for restoration activities, feel free to shoot me an email. And if there's enough interest, that's something that we could facilitate if the community is interested. Well, it looks like there's maybe a couple questions being put in the chat box. What's the timeline that folks can realistically expect for by the time they submit their joint application? We're going to assume that they've put all the information that's required and necessary, and you're able to review it in one go. How long does it take to get the PGP-10 permit kind of stamped with a yes?
So it should take about 20 days from a complete application. That is, most of the times, I would say 95% of the times it would take about 20 days. But that's for the internal process between the Corps and the state. Sometimes, so the way that it works is the application is submitted to the state. The state will contact the Corps and provide the information to the Corps. We'll review the information. And then if we need additional information, we'll contact the applicant and say, hey, this is the information that you need to provide so you can have a complete application. From that point, it would be 20 days. Once we have that, we contact the state and we tell them this application is complete. In 20 days, you're going to get a response from us. In those 20 days, we have to write the documentation. because for every project that we review, we have to justify the issuance of a permit. So it is a lot of writing of documents and everything. Actually, the MFR, which is the Memorandum for Record for the PGP 10, is like, what, 10 pages long or something. So it is a lot of writing and documenting, and that's why we request all the information that we request. And then the state, usually they're very quick at providing a response, but Daren could be, he would be the one telling you more or less how long they take on average to provide the final permit, because they're the ones that give the final authorization. Once you have that paper, that's when you can start construction.
Okay, wonderful. In my experience, I would give at least 3 months, I think, is generous and conservative. Sometimes it's less than that, but for my own project planning, that's kind of a conservative estimate that I go with. Just a really important comment here is that if your stream restoration project does proceed through the nationwide 27 permit application process, that does not exempt you from obtaining that state stream alteration permit. So just keep that in mind, just to clarify. So thanks for that comment from Kent. A couple questions about Endangered Species Act and SHPO compliance. I'll ask of you, and if you can provide responses, great. If not, we could do some follow-up. But what type of documentation for the PGP 10 permit do you typically require for Endangered Species Act impacts? You know, the Fish and Wildlife Service provides a report through the IPAC system. And is that appropriate for your needs at the Corps?
For the PGP 10?
For the PGP 10, yeah.
Well, the PGP 10 does not authorize any impacts to endangered species. So if the project is in an area that provides critical habitat for ESA species, then we would have to make a no effect determination for that project. Once we make a no effect determination, we don't need to go through the consultation process. So that's something that we make the determination. A lot of most of the projects, I would say, qualify for a no effect because they're minor projects. That's the whole idea behind the PGP 10. So I don't know if I don't know if I would get so much into the determination and how you can provide concurrence with effects determination for ESA, because I don't know if that would be applicable for these projects. But we can definitely talk, with the applicant for case-specific projects where that could be a problem. But I have never seen any project that would have an effect on endangered species that we're processing under a GP10. Maybe Samantha, do you have anything in your area? Because you have more ESA issues. Have you ever seen anything?
Yeah. I would say mostly projects that are done on the Virgin River. That is where you might run into a problem where it wouldn't qualify for a PGP 10 if there were concerns about ESA species. But I guess I would just mention that it's really mostly when we get applications from another federal agency that we really have to worry about getting the proper documentation for that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, for the most part, if they've gone through the consultation process themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when you get into an issue where, for example, if the Forest Service went through the consultation process, the Corps would have to designate the Forest Service as the lead federal agency in the consultation process. So it gets a little complicated. And that's why I'm saying it's like we don't see that very often. And if we do see that, we can definitely talk to the applicant and kind of guide them through the process and tell them, look, this is going to be a problem, and we'll help you out. But I don't see that happening very often.
Okay, thanks. And kind of a similar question, but for a different resource, and that's cultural resources. For the PGP 10 permit, what documentation is needed for cultural resources? And And this question is framed by this comment as well. So here in Utah, the State Historic Preservation Office has granted an exemption for fishery habitat projects that are confined to the stream channel. And so this person is asking, you know, is a memo from our archaeologist sufficient to kind of check that box?
So that's the reason behind changing the limitations on the PGB-10 was, one of the reasons was because of cultural resources, because we needed to make sure that we were in compliance with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Because when you have unlimited impacts, or you can allow for unlimited impacts, you don't have a control over the areas where the project is going to be happening. So that's the reason why we needed to change it, because we need to go and see the specific areas where the project is happening. That's why pictures are important. So it would be kind of the same answer when it comes to ESA. It's very specific, but I mean, how many projects do you think that are going to have an effect on cultural resources? I mean, those projects would probably be larger scale projects that would require a different type of permit. So that's why I'm having a problem wrapping my head around processing something like that under a general permit number 10. Now, we could do it because the permit was modified to allow for that once there's another federal agency that's involved that went through the process. So if, for example, the project is happening in Forest Service land and the Forest Service went through the process with the SHPO and got a concurrence letter for a no effect determination, then that should suffice for our purposes. So if you have that from the SHPO and you provide it with your application, we can definitely use that. So a concurrence letter from the SHPO would be sufficient, but it has to go through the consultation process.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. We have about 1 minute left in today's webinar. This is an easy question. Is there an application fee for the PGP-10?
Not for the Corps. None of our permits require a fee. There's mitigation, but for other types of projects. But the state, they do have a fee schedule, and I think it's $100, $500, and $2,000, depending on, you know, if it's a single family property, a government entity, but Daren can answer that question actually. But yeah, they have a fee schedule.
Nope, you got it right. Okay, well, with that, I thank you so much, Nicole and Samantha, for your time. We, like I said, have recorded this and we will be sending around an email with the link to this if you wanted to watch it or share it with your colleagues. Thanks so much for your time. And if you have any questions, Nicole and Samantha's email addresses are on the slide here. And you're also welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions for me at Wild Utah Project. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend. Stay safe.
Thanks. Happy Friday. Bye.
Thanks.